Good morning, everybody. Patrick, thank you for that completely unnecessary and untrue glowing hype. My name is George Thomas. I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer of an entity called Connected DMV, and I also lead the Potomac Quantum Innovation Center, which is an initiative of Connected DMV. And I'll go into both a little bit as we get going. Thank you for having me here this morning. So Connected DMV was set up, thought up about 5 years ago as a not-for-profit that is serving in the function of equitable economic development for Greater Washington. And the reason for this is, if you think about Greater Washington, we have about 6.5 million people. We have an economy of about roughly 550 to 580 billion, which if we were an independent country, we would be about the 26th, 27th largest country in the world. But we are unable to act like it because we are split between Maryland, Virginia, the district, and the US federal government. So this initiative was set up by, you can see some of the founding members, these things, public, private, academia, across the region, to kind of think of how do we move the needle forward with what we need to do. And within the structure of that, we are organized by initiatives. So we have a large initiative in healthcare, which is focused on human monoclonal antibodies. We have an initiative in climate, which is focused on creating a hydrogen economy. We have an initiative in technology, which happens to be focused on quantum. And we have a horizontal initiative called Next Versity, which is reimagining the workforce pipeline talent development continuum across the region for what it is. So when you think about assets for what we have in Greater Washington, we have some of the most deepest assets for any region in the world that we have, because we have federal labs. We have over 100 federal labs in the region, far more so than any other region in the United States, which means we are among the largest in the world. We have major industries based here. This is the nation's capital. Every major country is headquartered here. Pretty much every Fortune 500 company has a significant presence here from a company perspective. So significant amount of assets. This allows us to kind of, I'm not sure what happened there, Frank. Yeah.
I'm going to say interpretive dance. Pretend that my standing here does something.
It does. So yes. So we have these 4 major initiatives. They're all in the act. We are a land of think tanks in Greater Washington, as you know, right? Lots of papers written, lots of hype about what one might do. We are very much focused on initiatives. And these are the 4 big ones that we spend a lot of our time doing. We are kind of anchored by the 2 things you see at the top and the bottom. The bottom is the DMV Regional Congress, which is a quarterly meeting of 72 of the region's CEOs. Think about both the mayors, both the governors, the mayor of the district, lots of federal government entities, CEOs of everything from MedStar, Pepco, Washington Gas. So all of the major industrials in the region kind of meet once a quarter to kind of guide the development of the types of programs that as a region should think about. And the other one that you see up there is called REDS. It's economic development for the region. So as a city, as a region, we are very young. We are about 150 years old. In the scheme of history of humanity, it's very tiny. But in that 150 years, we have never actually had a common plan for what we're going to do as a community. So REDS kind of manages and runs that, and it's the kind of like the tactical board that helps runs the other centers. So today it's all about quantum, Potomac Quantum Innovation Center, and there's 4 focuses in quantum. But the reason we did this is about in 2019, we started looking across technologies that are up and coming. We are looking 5 to 10 years ahead, and we started categorizing the things that are happening around the world. There were 19 possible technologies that we were relatively good at in the region that made it to the list. There was a whole exercise done. Quantum rose to the top after that 6-month piece of work as something that we should focus on to create an economy in the region. And that was based on 2 things. Enough science and engineering has been done to show pilots and use cases. Enough industries who will benefit from those use cases exist in the DC region. The big industries that we are focused in are life sciences and biotech, huge hub in the DC region for those of you that don't know. Defense and national security, for obvious reasons. Energy and energy transition, for obvious reasons. So we picked industries where quantum would have an impact with. We have enough assets in quantum across academia, private, federal government, labs, research expertise in the region, and we have a tremendous education network, including Mason and 4 other universities in the region that are tremendously deep in quantum in various ways. So because of that, we picked quantum. So our focus was the scientists, the researchers, the builders are doing the work. If you imagine ourselves in 5 years, 10 years, what would they need to be successful? And we started focusing on that. Build the ecosystem, build the catchers, so when the ball is thrown, there's somebody to catch it. And that's kind of manifested itself into 4 things. Quantum Academy, we do a lot of work with Dr. Rosenberg as kind of like our co-lead in that. There's stuff for K through 12. Patrick talked about a few of those. There's stuff in executive awareness, there's content creation, there's partnerships. We're trying to bring people to land here. A lot of work happening in Quantum Academy. And one of the things that Dr. Rosenberg and I kind of co-lead is something called the K14 Working Group, which is the 6 school districts, the community colleges, and a bunch of other people within the region who are collaborating to try to figure out how do we start as early as possible to get kids aware and into this world. And then at the other end of the spectrum, how do we go into folks who are in adjacent industries and drag them into the world of quantum? Think data science, AI, ML, think manufacturing. How do we bring them in? So from both ends of the spectrum, how do you kind of reimagine that? So that's all in the academy. Last year, we launched the Policy and Ethics Center with MITRE and 9 other organizations, including George Mason University. So I grew up in corporate, lived through development of multiple technologies like AI, have seen the outcomes when it is not planned from a policy and ethics perspective, the bad fights that happens and the damage to society. So with quantum, we decided to kind of get ahead of the curve. So this is an open public forum with industry at the table, government at the table, and research and neutral parties at the table from community to create a dialogue over the next 3 to 5 years before the battle lines are drawn and what should be regulated, what should not be regulated, how do we collaborate. So the Policy and Ethics Center was a major initiative to kind of get ahead of the curve on what we do for societal impact. Innovation hubs and World Congress, I'll talk about in a little bit more detail today. But before I do, to kind of augment what Patrick said, I hope the sound is going to come through. This is a little video we put together last year for the Quantum World Congress on the history of quantum. Hope the sound comes through. You can see how recent the major developments have been in this industry. So if you take any science that is proven in a lab, the traditional approach is 20 years from lab to something commercializable. That's almost always been the case with a few exceptions. One exception I wanted to use as an anecdote is electric vehicles. I've said this a couple of times before, but do you guys in the room have an idea when the first fleet of electric vehicles was put into commercial use? It was a taxi service with 32 cars that was commercially usable. and put out on the road? Rough guess. Nobody? When was the first commercial fleet of electric vehicles put out on the road? There's a fleet of 32 vehicles, roughly. 1992. That's a good guess. Anybody else? 2010. Another good guess. It was called the Hummingbird Taxi Service. It was put on the ground outside a London metro station in 1897. 1897. The first electric vehicle fleet was put on the ground. So it was brilliant. It was taxis that had massive batteries in the front, would run for X number of miles, kilometers. Once they are near depletion, they would go into a shed, a massive crane would come, lift the battery out, put another battery in. 20 minutes later, they're back on the street. In 1897, think about it, right? It lasted for 6 years and they ran out of business. Do you know the reason why? Vulcanization of rubber had not been invented. It only got invented in 1920. The tires were not solid enough to carry the battery vehicles. So we lost 100+ years. The next week, the Hummingbird service is now again running in London. Happened 110 years later because of a technology that had nothing to do with what the core of what they were doing was, but was adjacent. So in quantum, while we talk about quantum and everything that we're doing in quantum, it's all the quantum adjacent technologies that have to play in to make some of these ideas a success. So a lot of what we are capable of today that was not possible back then is the network and the integration and the collaboration of the research that's happening. That's really a lot of what this is about. And a lot of other things, including like in AI groups, fail because we are not able to network and collaborate as effectively as possible. So if you're a researcher, you get siloed to 1 or 2 use cases because that's where the money comes from in 1 or 2 industries with maybe 1 client. And that's what you develop a lot of hypotheses about. And that is a major kind of problem in how we function as society. So the Innovation Hub's idea is really to kind of go beyond that and try to create a mechanism where you're collectivizing pre-competitive nature industry sectors that are buyers and users of the upcoming technology. So think about it as users of a user group. You're creating a user group before this actual product and having the user group dictate or influence what product is being created. Our traditional approach is people are out there creating hammers. Once they have their version of a hammer, they go out and look for who needs a nail hammered in, and let me go find a client and let me go do that. And my hammer will be for one type of nail, nothing else. I can't do anything with a screw, blah, blah, blah. This is trying to change that metric a little bit, is the ambition behind this. So this was kind of like the structure, and we see one of the things in here which Patrick's been kind of very involved in trying to help us think through is the shared infrastructure. Many of the things that happen in things like quantum, the barrier to entry is very high. You don't need to buy the same thing 5 times versus trying to figure out where the gaps are. So across these industry sectors, we're trying to think through shared infrastructure. What does that look like? Who needs to do what? How did you kind of get into the game? Quantum is especially difficult because of the amount of dollars it takes to really be effective in creating the core hardware. It's very difficult to get into. The software and other parts in computing is easy. There are other pieces of it that are easy, but the big chunk of science is hard and expensive and difficult. So that's really the kind of like a function behind the hubs. We got an award last year for the first of those hubs with Mason and others. Our lead kind of partner is Cleveland Clinic, to create a life sciences quantum hub here in the region. So that's work's been underway. Since this got awarded, we have now taken in Novo Nordisk and GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, as life sciences partners, and this is kind of being expanded as we think about to kind of expand what that looks like. So think about it as a user community that's then going to help influence, kick off pilots from a very practical perspective, invest, co-innovate, co-develop algorithms within the space with quantum companies, with IBM, so Cleveland Clinic, as an example, has invested in an IBM quantum computer. They have the first out-of-the-lab commercial quantum system one from IBM in Cleveland today. The ribbon cutting ceremony was, I think, like 2 months ago. So, etc. Novo Nordisk has just announced a $200 million investment in quantum. This is a way to kind of interact and get those things together. And essentially, the plan for this year is to kind of do the structure for how do you work together. There have been attempts to do this. The biggest example of this is something called Sematech, which was done in the 1980s, 1990s for semiconductors. Massive investment to get all the semiconductor players in the room to kind of push forward together. And that led to a 30-year dominance in semiconductor industry of new technologies and standards. The attempt is to do something similar using individual silos of functions for quantum and quantum adjacent is the idea. I'm not going to do this. So the participants are the buyers and users, all the builder community, governments of various types, from people funding, building of quantum, to buying of technology, to regulations and policy. Networks, some of the organizations Patrick mentioned, like QEDC, QIC, there's other variations of that in every country. How do you get them in? Experts not in quantum, but experts, for example, in life sciences, there are companies who specialize in drug discovery. That's all they do. They're consultants to figure out. There are companies that specialize in algorithm creation. How do you get them in an expert network to kind of figure out what is the value proposition? And finally, the investment community. Most new technologies, this is another massive point of failure. In AI, we used to call it the AI winter, where everybody was promised an AI app on your phone 25 years ago. It never came, and all the investors said, this is not real, and I'm walking away. It created a decade plus of no investment in AI till now. Now the rules change, but we want to try to prevent that in the world of quantum and having a 20-year gap in investments. So how do you kind of do that? So each of the hubs kind of manages and kind of runs around. So that's the hubs. That's just the third part. And Quantum World Congress is the thing I want to spend a little bit more time on. We had the first inaugural Quantum World Congress last year. The basic concept was there were a lot of conferences that were in the technology. We want to create a cross-sector effort to get the investors with the government, with the builders in the same room. This was held at the Ronald Reagan building last year. We had delegations from 18 countries, a pretty cross sector. It was over 3 days, 120 speakers. I think we had 70-ish panels and sessions to kind of do this is what we had in 2022. And of the 700 plus registrants, this was kind of like a breakout, very, very cross sector, because this is who you need in the room to kind of work on it. So when you think quantum, most of you here are from a sciences perspective. But what are the kinds of jobs that come up in quantum? You could be a policy analyst. You could go on the hill. There's n number of things you could do in any of these new technologies. And those jobs will go span across all of this, not just a PhD in research. You could have a PhD in quantum and physics and still go run one of these organizations. And we need more of that. We need more scientists in the room where decisions about money and policy are being done, which we don't have today. So that's one of the key things we want to kind of impress on everybody coming into the field is don't just think of your jobs that you'll have to do in the lab. Think of where it might be in other places, but you do need that background expertise to even go into some of those rooms. So that is kind of like one of the focuses that we were doing. This was the list of 18 that we had last year from a country perspective. Many of them sent the heads of quantum for their country, most of the labs. Canada and the US, President Macron and President Biden signed a US-France quantum agreement the day before the conference. So this was pretty well received, and lots of people from around the world. As you saw on Patrick's slide in investment, there's a tremendous amount of interest across the globe with regard to what this promises and what the risk might be perceived. We did an assessment of the people attending on what interests you most. This is kind of the breakdown that came up. And again, this is people who answered, not all 700 plus, so take it with a grain of salt with regard to the data source. But you can see computing and AI very clearly are at the top of the things of the most levels of interest. And some of that has got to do with the marketing, right? Who's advertising quantum out there today? It's the big tech companies primarily. And so therefore, from a market perspective, this seems to be the kind of like perceived interest as of there. I think Dr. Rosenberg just is going to talk about this. This was one of the things we did. The Pathways to Quantum, the summer program, ended up with some of the kids getting posters at the Quantum World Congress, a separate section for it. You can see, this was, I think, Jessica, one of the most well-received highlights within the conference itself. Just having 16, 17-year-olds there to talk about their interest in the quantum. Top left, you'll see Dr. Rosenberg talking to Governor Hogan, explaining the poster. It was simply incredible to have kids that young interested and being involved and what to do with. And many of the 13 kids who went into the program have now decided to pursue careers in quantum, which is again fantastic. The other thing we did was we had the first quantum startup pitch competition dedicated to a particular area. We had asked for for applications and involvement in life sciences and biotech, and along with MITRE and Shulman Rogers, which is a large law firm focused on startups and us. We ran the first competition. There were like, I don't know how many initial applications. 6 were down selected for the finalists. They all presented. Hugh Braid, which is a company out of Chicago, won the first prize. The prize itself was cash prize of 25,000, and then another 30,000 in kind stuff for the first prize winners, and a number of other kind of connections, including into kind of MITRE labs for support as they grow, etc. We're going to be repeating this year again. And finally, the last thing we did was with the 18 countries, and this is where Patrick got the number 11 from. 11 of those countries participated in a 3-hour roundtable to talk through these topics of how do you coordinate, what do you do. If you take any technology that is new, on average, it's probably about 200 people worth their salt around the world. Take any technology, right? And 200 is probably a stretch, right, Joseph? It's very, very, very limited, right? And to progress anything, those people need to know each other and work with each other. So part of this was, how do we do that? How do we do that against the threat of brain drains? How do we become more collaborative? What is a like-minded country? All of that became part of the conversations and discussions. So this is kind of, maturing into more of a robust kind of exchange of ideas with those, 11 countries. Now it's expanding to more and more people wanting to get involved in the discussions as we go forward. So that was a very highlight about what it is, and I'm going to do one more little video about the content itself so you can have a visual.
Welcome to Quantum World Congress 2022.
So 2023 has been announced. We have moved it a little earlier, September 26th to 28th. It's in Virginia. This time we are moving it around. Last time it was in DC. This time it's in Virginia. Next time it's going to be in Maryland. It's going to be at the new Capital One Hall and Center for those that have not seen it. This is the place with the mini golf on the roof. If you haven't seen, I would highly recommend going to this place called the Perch. It's got like 2 bars. It's amazing. So that's really the building. So that's all up here. But it's going to be in this kind of network, and this is right across the road from where. This is what it looks like just from the inside. So you have a view about what the facility is going to look like. It is fantastic, Class A kind of conference space. We're expecting about 1,200 people from about 25 countries to attend this year. Program is going to be roughly the same, but we are adding a few more things to it. Besides everything else that you saw from last year, we're adding a quantum for data centers segment. As many of you know, we have a huge monopoly of data centers and data center players in the region. It's kind of, we own like 70% of the world's kind of data for the internet flies through this region. So quantum is going to be a big thing for many of them, both from the aspects of protecting what they have from a data perspective, as well as quantum computers that are available for use for others within it. So the special program that's been set up to do that on the main day. Besides the startup pitch competition, the startup we are going to do that this year is going to be focused on national security this year, not life sciences. But we're also opening up a new thing that we're calling a quantum challenge, specifically for education companies to step into the world of quantum. So we are, gotten funding from a philanthropy organization in education to kind of encourage companies to teach quantum, and companies that can come in can do that. So it's going to be a challenge that happens with education in quantum as well. I think that's it on programming. There's opportunities to volunteer at Quantum World Congress 2023. You get access to the floor, access to networking. We had, I think, a number of people volunteer last year as well. Same things are open for this year. So if anybody's interested, you can kind of reach out and we can kind of set you up with it. And everything that you need for quantum, you can just reach us at quantum@connecteddmv.org is the website for anything we do. Or the website itself for the Quantum World Congress is quantumworldcongress.com. that you can do. So that's it from a presentation perspective. I can kind of shut that down. What else? Questions? Yes. It's not been published yet. It will come out. Registration opens in about a month and a half. Other questions? Not Quantum World Congress, Innovation Hub, Quantum in general, the ecosystem. Yeah, sure. So that's the hub that we're talking about. So the hub, the award we got from the Department of Commerce. Department of Commerce typically does not give awards for technologies that they don't feel drive economic impact. So we were the first award for quantum out of commerce that's ever come out. And we're the first, I think, quantum life sciences hub that got awarded. Australia, after we got awarded one as well. So we're collaborating with Australia Bio to kind of figure out what it is. The basic premise is to collectivize across those 6 things in the ring, life sciences and bio companies together to work together on common problems. So I'll take a couple of examples of partners. So Cleveland Clinic has been investing in quantum for about 2.5 years now. They announced this big discovery accelerator with IBM. They have over 200 use cases that they have been building. 25 of them have made it to the final kind of test on the QC. They have a 127 qubit quantum computer right now that they're testing it on. They'll eventually test it on Osprey, which is 433 qubits. That's the plan. So that's one investment from one company with one technology with use cases that they think are important. So where they saw the danger with that is siloed mentality. I don't know what I don't know, therefore that's what I'm investing in. At the same time that that's going on, GSK is doing similar things in their lab in Italy. Novo is doing similar things in their lab in Denmark and Potomac. So the idea behind this came from how do we collaborate pre-competitive IP, because they're all heavy competitors against each other, in places where there are gaps to do more together. So if I'm Cleveland, then off my 25, 5 of them completely fail on IBM QC. Is it a problem with the technology? Is it a problem with the algorithm? How do I test that? That goes into the common pool and they can work with other players to try to figure out what it is. The use cases themselves could be create an environment to collaborate among what that is. And so that's basically the fundamental idea. So besides the QC, the quantum computing companies that are coming through these partnerships, each of them are partnerships with different companies. There are neutral companies like IonQ who don't play in the life sciences space today. So this is an opportunity for QC companies to then get into the mix to kind of get involved with it. So that's from a compute perspective. Phase 1 is all compute. Phase 2, what these guys are really interested in is sensing and materials. That market is completely fragmented. There's 100 tiny companies or big companies that don't know what they're doing. They want in the next year and a half, after the next year and a half, to start collectivizing their thoughts on sensors and trying to figure out could they influence the market to build XYZ pilots within that to kind of move the real forward. So that's essentially the fulcrum of the idea from the builders and the buyers perspective. And all the other partners that you see on it are sitting at the sidelines. So we've gotten a lot of inbound from investors in quantum, investors in life sciences, and government investors who want a seat at the table to try to figure out what's going on, to both identify technology and talent, as well as to invest at the network level. So because instead of investing in a company that's building a chip for one purpose, could I invest across the spectrum? So that's what their interest is. Again, we'll have to we have a year plus of work to do before we can identify specifically what that looks like. That's conceptually the construct. The one thing I didn't mention is with Mason and under University of Maryland, we submitted a bid for an NSF engine in the region focused on quantum. That NSF engine is $160 million over 10 years. The idea behind that is to take this concept and then apply it in defense and national security with Army Research Labs and apply it in earth sciences with NASA. So to kind of take what we are doing over the next year and a half here and apply it into new industries. So that's really the concept of the hubs itself that we're doing is get the people who are going to buy and use it at the table while everybody's building and doing research.
You mentioned quantum education. What would that look like in a K-12 sector? So trying to translate quantum education in school right here.
Yeah, it's difficult for 2 reasons. One, the way education is structured in the United States, It's done at the county level from what you can teach and what the curriculum looks like. It has to adhere to standards at the state level. So the complication is, how do you equip each of the school districts in the region to know what to teach and then have them figure out how to attach it. So two paths you can do. One is the standard structure of how do you do that for anything in technology or anything that's new into curriculum. That is one process. So for that, you have to educate the administrators and you educate teachers to know what to do and where to go and where. So that's going on. Second to that is the things you can do on the side, extracurricular. Is what kind of programs we have. Like the Pathways program is an extracurricular program. There are many other extracurricular programs that's possible to do. How do you do that? How do you attract the right types of kids with aptitude for those kind of things to know about it? And how do you attract the types of kids who would never know about it? Like, how would you know about quantum if nobody told you about it? You're either in the right socioeconomic class, or your parents are in some field where you're talking about that thing, or there is some connection to it. But there are many kids in our society who don't have any of those, right? So how do you kind of then expand the access to create awareness as part of the program? So curriculum building, extracurricular activities, educating the educators are all part of that kind of network and allowing them to network with each other. We have 6 big school districts in the region: Fairfax, Loudoun, Arlington, Montgomery, Prince George's, and BC. How do you get them to talk to each other instead of trying to work at it in their silos? That's really conceptually what we're trying to do.
About quantum sensors, specifically, like what advantages the quantum sensor have over classical sensor, what kind of information?
I'm not equipped to talk about this at all. I think Joseph maybe even, or
That's
somebody else.
actually a lovely transition into
Yes.
our next talk, which is on quantum sensors. And efforts done by inside sensors in how to use quantum related effects.
Yes. Quantum and connecteddmv.org, or go to pqic.org, which is the main site for Potomac Quantum. Whatever you see there, just send an email to that. Somebody will get back to you to get involved. You can get involved in the lab, you can get involved at Quantum World Congress, you can get involved in the Policy and Ethics Center, you can get involved in education, you can come up with a brand new idea that nobody's thought about and try to figure out, we can help you figure out how to go through it. Like one of the interesting things that came out of the Pathways to Quantum last year was this notion of trying to create quantum clubs in high schools around the region. So a couple of the kids kind of ran off and have run with that. So brand new idea to create a network from that perspective. So anything and everything. We are here to build and help build the ecosystem for this to be successful and to have people to have careers in it, and for there to be funding in our region and funding in quantum for it, and kind of so all of that. That's really the motivation from our perspective. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, George.